Before we jump into all this stuff, I just want to take a second to remind everybody of, you know, how far we've come, like what this represents. Going all the way back, because I think a lot of Americans forget this, Brazil was a country that within living memory was under military dictatorship. And the choice between these two fellows could not be any more clear. During the military dictatorship, which was something that Bolsonaro not only loved, but was a fervent supporter of, Lula was a trade union leader, right? Lula is missing, was injured as a worker. This is somebody who comes from the working class. This is not somebody who got a fancy degree and decided to sort of like sit on an origin story. This is somebody who comes very clearly rooted out of the working class movement. Lula was a trade union leader during the dictatorship, faced incredible repression during that period of time. He ran for president multiple times after the dictatorship ended and did not win. He did not win, especially in his first, second attempts, did not even come close. But he did not abandon the fight. And he eventually won and became the president of Brazil. And he massively improved the lives of Brazilian people through state investment and programs like Bolsa Familia, right, which provided food and funding to poor working class families in Brazil. So much so that when you go back and you look at the records, you can actually see the improvement in people's lives, right? You see it in heights. You see it in literacy levels. I mean, this is real deal. You talk about bread and butter politics. That's what Lula has been doing his entire political career. And during this period of time, he made tactical decisions, right? I'm just saying this, because Michael would get mad at me because I'm I just turned 30, so I don't know if I can still call myself young anymore. But I came from.
Oh,
Um,
the young Republicans, by the young Republican standard, you're still young. So
okay,
anyway,
good.
continue.
Okay,
We'll
I'll
get to
hold
them in a
myself to
second.
that standard. I'll hold myself to that standard. But I came from a left socialist movement that was very like much we're reading about history and not engaged in politics, if that makes sense. So I have my criticisms of Lula, right, that came from people like David Harvey and other folks, right? And Michael really didn't like that. And I bring that up to say, like, when Lula was president, he made tactical decisions to do all of these benefit programs for the poor while trying to maintain, a level of GDP growth, economic programs that allowed for the rich in Brazil to continue amassing incredible fortunes, right? And I bring that up just to say, not to criticize Lula. This is actually one of the most important things about understanding about Lula's politics and his role, but to say that that wasn't even enough, right? Like Lula improved the lives of poor and working class people, and the people at the top of that society did very well, but that wasn't enough. He said, Lula said at one point, a complaint that he heard from a rich Brazilian was that the airports in Brazil now look like bus stations, which is a very nasty, nasty thing to say. But I think it also is helpful to remind folks about what they're up against in that country too.
I mean, it's the most sort of poetic evocation of what reaction looks like from somebody who has seen it from one of the highest levels of trying to, like, frankly, liberate people. That, there's going to be a class of people who really resent that, which is grim. And, what's so interesting about this now is you have people who are frankly um, to the right of left of center, but to the right of where Lula would be, who like are
Mm-hmm.
skeptical of, say, Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn, but understand one, Bolsonaro is very bad because yes, he is and was. And two, the Amazon is significantly important to us as like a global community, and that tension is very interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm. And I've said this before, and I know Matt's probably tired of hearing me saying that, but like, it's also important to be careful about how we talk about that because it absolutely is true
Exactly.
that the Amazon is of critical importance to the global ecosystem. But it really does piss me off the way that you even hear some liberals who might be supporting Lula doing it solely for the fate of the Amazon. So again, I'm not saying that it's not an important issue. I'm not saying that it's not worth caring about to encourage people to support Lula, but it sort of is like, well, you should have some thought also about like the lives of the millions of people who live in
Right.
Brazil too.
And what's so great about Lula is he, like we talk about Bernie Sanders about the conciseness of the messaging. When Lula gets clipped by like Channel 4 News in the UK, the things he's are saying like we need to show that we can build prosperity and protect the rainforest. Like those things are
Mhm.
hand in hand, and that's really like fundamentally the like can he do that both? Because like there are, I think, very powerful interests that don't want that lesson to be proven,
Mhm.
especially like the folks who want to just extract everything.
So just jumping back into the history a little bit though. So Lula was able to push forward all of these incredible reforms that again, like these are not small things. This is like world historic changes in people's like lived reality, their experience, the food that they have, their nutrition, basic shit. Lula was able to push through all these reforms oftentimes with very hostile Congresses, right? With the right wing or like the center right in power. And Lula was able to do this because he had the incredible ability to be able to leverage the social movements in the country without waiting, as you hear in the United States all the time. Well, Biden can't do anything because Biden's waiting for, super majorities in Congress. Lula was able to do that in incredible hostility in a country that has, in recent memory, a history of military dictatorship. So I'm just going to say I have very little time for excuses on that front. Lula knew the moment that he was in. Lula knew the conditions that he was in and was able to provide incredible amounts of things for people. The right came back with a vengeance, first deposing Dilma Rousseff, who I think it's also important that people in the American left familiarize themselves with, because she too was taken down for very spurious, nonsensical reasons and was replaced with a right wing dinosaur, Temer, who imposed harsh austerity on the country of Brazil. And when Lula was primed to retake power, the right and the rich and the United States imposed a system of lawfare. Or some people might not know what that word means, but it means like using the legal system to promote like legal warfare against an opponent. And this move was supported clandestinely by the United States government, which was sought to destroy Lula and that movement. And they promoted nonsensical corruption charges against him. And that led to Lula being barred from running, and he was later imprisoned. And then after that, Haddad, who was sort of picked to replace Lula when Lula was going to be in prison and was barred from running for president, lost to Bolsonaro, which ushered in all of this devastation for working class Brazilians, indigenous people, and the environment. And I just want to say right up top, our friend Michael would not let this story disappear in the United States. And, as I said earlier, now you even have kind of like softer Democrats pushing for more investigation into the US role. And before we get back to Lula, I do just want to, since this is the opportunity to remember maybe some old wounds, there were a lot of critics of what Michael was saying about Lula, and he was 100% vindicated. Now, those people all now support Lula and act as if they didn't have questions. But when Michael said, no, the corruption charges against Lula are spurious and erroneous, people were like, well, I don't know. Maybe he is corrupt. He's been president for a long time. And they were playing into that same game that the right wing was pushing. And I just want to, shout out Michael for having the courage and the research ability and having a long view of history to recognize that all this shit was not going to last. And it's also a good reminder as we do things going forward. You and Matt, me and Matt and other folks, that a lot of people will jump on the bandwagons of things, and that's why these kind of right wing stories can be so damaging. Like I remember when Evo Morales was being challenged by a nonsensical charge of um, you know, stealing the election in Bolivia. You had a lot of people on the quote unquote left in the United States and abroad, um, you know, hedging their bets, playing both sides, not being able to take a firm stance on this kind of thing. And I don't know. It's worth remembering if you, as much as Matt and I are remembering this moment in a great way of like one success for the Brazilian people and also a really great vindication for Michael Brooks. Also remember that there were a lot of detractors when all this was going
Yeah,
on. But let's before we go any further, let's get to the man himself. I'm sure many people have seen this before, but This is the perfect time to play it. This is Lula right before he surrendered himself to be falsely imprisoned for the nonsensical charges in Lava Jato. Speaking the way that Lula speaks.
Lula é esperança, Lula é força, Lula é resistência.
Eu não estou escondido, eu vou lá na barba deles, para eles saberem que eu não tenho medo, para eles saberem que eu não vou correr e para eles saberem que eu vou provar a minha inocência. Eles têm que saber disso. Esse sindicato tem quase 283 diretores.
Yeah. I mean, I remember playing that out of it's so good, man. It's like the man knows how to rise to a moment for sure. And like, he had incredible courage not running. There's a lot of people who are, trying to say he should leave the country instead of being in prison because they were understandably afraid of what the right wing was going to be doing under Bolsonaro. But Lula has that kind of courage that, not many of us are born with to refuse that advice.
I mean, and faith in the people. I feel like that. The only way you have faith in the justice system gonna come down on the right side of that thing is if you think the people are gonna overwhelm them when the facts come to light. And like that's what Lula called the bluff. Said, "Fine, I'll go to fucking jail. I'm gonna fight this shit." And I mean, yeah, that it's a pretty astounding, like that part. That's why like this almost feels like a cherry on top, is like sort of like the highs of him beating that crap, and then like this is just sort of like it's like the Western Conference Finals were like the real challenging one, and then like the NBA Finals are sort of like you're done in 5 games.
I'm just going to read this right quick for y'all because we're going to talk about the right wing in this country in a little bit. But I hear these kind of whiny, snot-nosed neoliberal characters still wanting to play this game about Lula maybe actually being corrupt, even though it has been completely repudiated at this point. Yeah, I mean, sorry, like these people. This is not the focus of the clip, so I don't want to get worked up about it. But like these people always act like they have facts and reason and logic by their side. They don't read shit. They just think that whatever like the lefty position on something is like the ill-informed one, when what they're spouting, especially in this case, is absolute nonsense.
I mean, corruption. I'm sorry, like, and this is like maybe not the most, like, this is just being real, and this is not being politic. Corruption is something, it's like a 5th level fucking concern, honestly. The first concerns is who's getting fed. And if the right people are getting fed, then you know what? It's a little, you look a bit past it. And this is not to say like Lula was, all that shit was bullshit. But I'm just saying, like, even bullshit. If, right? And if you look at the history of corruption politics going back to our country, which is like, when do we start getting obsessed with corruption politics? It's right after we enfranchise black people, right? And it's like, oh, we really look at the way all this patronage is like, yeah, you should have told that to fucking Andrew Jackson, right? Like you didn't have complaints back then, but now all of a sudden we're really wringing our hands about like, ooh, this and that. And it's like, generally you have to be like, we just know that is weaponized by reaction. That's just a fundamental fact. We can all want to fight corruption, and that is a great goal, and bureaucracies like engender that. you have to be real about like what's going on the actual fucking playing field.
Well, and like again, I guess since we'll do it now. I think it's worthwhile remembering that in Brazil, like they don't have the same kind of system of legalized corruption that we do in the United States, right? Where like corporations could just donate millions of dollars legally to candidates. They have a system where there is a decent amount of grift because it just hasn't been legalized and formalized in the same way that it has in the modern day United States. I say all that. Just for one, people to understand the context, and two, the second point is that Lula has been completely cleared of all these things. All the investigations have come out and shown that it's completely erroneous. Just the most quick version of this for folks is that there were worries about the dealings of Petrobras, which is the state-run oil company, and where is Lula involved in this? The only thing that they could claim against Lula, which ended up not being true at all, was that Lula had a condo in a beach town. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, and I will admit I've never been to Brazil, so I don't want to attack any town or anything like that. But from what I've been told about by friends in Brazil, it's not even really like the nice beach town, right? It's actually like a very adorable one. It'd be like
Yeah.
having a condo in Myrtle Beach or something like that versus like Miami. But anyways, not even true. Lula didn't own the apartment, etc. He's been completely cleared on this. And again, if you don't want to take my word on it, right? You think, I'm just ideological leftist. Here is the
Yeah.
word of the United Nations Human Rights Council. While
Comment.
states have a duty to investigate and prosecute acts of corruption and to keep the population informed, especially when a former head of state is concerned, such actions must be conducted fairly and respect due process guaranteed, said committee member Arif Bulkin. The Supreme Federal Court quashed Lula's sentence in 2021, ruling that former Judge Sergio Moro, who had overseen the initial corruption trial, had no jurisdiction to investigate and try cases, and annulled the investigation on the basis that the former judge was not considered to be impartial. Going back to a quote, although the Supreme Federal Court vacated Lula's conviction and imprisonment in 2021, after he had already been imprisoned, this is my addition to that, after he had already been imprisoned, already pulled out of the election. Going back to the quote, these decisions were not timely and effective enough to avoid or redress the violations. Going back to the article released from the United Nations, the committee found that the conduct and other public acts of former Judge Moro violated Lula's rights to be tried by an impartial tribunal, and that the actions and public statements by the former judge and the prosecutors were also a violation of his rights to his presumption of innocence. These procedural violations rendered Lula's prohibition to run for president arbitrary, the committee ruled, and therefore in violation of his political rights, including his right to run for office. So again, you don't have to take it from me. This is the United Nations saying this at this point, right? The facts are very clear here. Lula has been vindicated, and his imprisonment was a farce of law and order. It was all about Sergio Moro trying to pursue a political career, and it was supported by the United States because they did not like the fact that Lula was, one, under Obama, more popular than Obama, and two, was somebody who would regularly stand up to American imperial ambitions across the globe. Sergio Moro, I think for Brazilians who are listening to this, they already know who he is. This is somebody who is the epitome of a careerist, somebody who threw the country of Brazil under the bus in order to further his own political ambitions. And Bolsonaro was the beneficiary of all this. Now, this is my perspective on this. I think that the capitalists and the rich and the powerful in Brazil did not intend for Bolsonaro to be the person who benefited from Lula's imprisonment, but they were very happy for Bolsonaro to beat Lula. I mean, to beat Haddad.
This is the classic elite conservative fascist trade-off, right? Like you got to have the base turnout in elections, in nominally democratic elections, and you can't say no to these guys.
Yep. So that's how we got to. Yeah, sorry.
One note, just to double back on the corruption thing, and again, you're right to keep underlining the Lula proved innocent, and like there's no there's the presumption of innocence is not afforded him. But I just like to put it into context of like this is Rex Tillerson's fucking house. like
Yeah.
like right, like in North Texas, like, and that's just like that's good. That's he deserves that, and it's just like I just got to say, like, if we nationalize, if a politician like isn't like if America, if we nationalize these oil industries, let's say Chris Murphy does that. uh, Chris Murphy can have a little beach house,
Mhm.
as far as I'm concerned. But anyway,
But
let's
again,
continue.
I know I do appreciate
Yes, I
your
know.
take, but it's
Yes,
just like it's not the same. I don't know if I
yes.
have any pictures of the interior, but let me just share this really quick with y'all, just if we're doing that, just so people understand also what we are talking about. Um, I didn't prep it, so I don't have any pictures of the interior. But like this is like the level, like a condo in a building like this. Again, not trying to demean anybody's place of living or anything like
No,
that, but it's
I'd
like
love to live in that,
one,
but
one, it's like the corrupt what was alleged against him was not true, and two, it's like honestly, it's like a little adorable if that's like the
exactly,
spoils,
yeah.
right? I hear you. I hear
Oh
you.
my goodness.